I'm sorry about the mess on the table. I'm sure it was an accident. My hands are made of nitroglycerine. That explains the incident. Fortune built my hopes in daydreams, pages I'd never seen. I'm sorry you were so disappointed. The contract states quite fundamentally, the undersigned is you lay your life on the line. No questions, life on the line. That's fine. Just sign on the dotted line. The nib hesitates at the ink. Well, a sample of the poet's blood. Guitars pluck a tune in the ozone, and me, I'm just a stick in the mud.
The punk thing was dying out, or at least it was going commercial, you know, so everybody was looking for something new. And there was this club that we used to go to. It was called Studio 21. That's where I probably first heard Fad Gadget. And it was probably Back to Nature.
Listening to Back to Nature now, it's incredible how powerful it sounds and how you can tell he was in control of something even at the very beginning.
Back to nature, your code is filled and programmed to respond.
It was real special, and the music was like something that only we knew about, you know, this little club that maybe held tops like 100 people.
It was why we were listening to TVOD on top of lots and lots of reggae music, and I think Barbara's, collection of David Bowie LPs and whatever we had, at the time, Kraftwerk and stuff like that. Frank was doing these extraordinary things in the cupboard where he was performing on an ironing board using the most primitive equipment. So we were all sort of thinking, well, Frank's pretty good, isn't he? Maybe we should try and figure out who'd be interested in listening to him as well. And so, in a way, you kind of sort of mind.
It was Edwin Pouncey who first introduced me to Daniel Miller in 1979.
I remember quite clearly you saying to me, oh, you should listen to this guy, Frank, or Fad Gadget.
Yeah.
He was Fad Gadget.
He was Fad Gadget,
at that time already, wasn't he?
Which was a pretty damn good name, I thought.
Yeah, exactly. It was an excellent name.
Well, Fad Gadget was just a kind of made-up name that was meant to sound like some product you'd find in a supermarket, something kind of throwaway.
When you put a record out on your own from your bedroom, you put your address on it and everybody thinks you're a record label.
Yeah.
When you're not really, you just put a record out. I got quite a few demos sent to me, which was quite shocking, and I didn't really like any of them. Then Frank came in, we met at Rough Trade, I remember. And he played me a few songs, and I was really immediately impressed and blown away by them. It was much better than anything I'd heard that had been sent to me in the previous 6 or 8 months. And that was kind of one of the triggers that said, okay, well, I really like this, I really like Frank, why don't I put it out?
The first single, Back to Nature, was a pretty good start, but I think the one that really hit off was the next one, which was Ricky's Hand, and it had all those elements of humour in it as well, and a bit of a storytelling, and in a way, to me, I don't know what you think, but it sort of came to encapsulate what it had gone before, not what had gone afterwards, you know what I mean? That was sort of like the foundations for his career, really.
Yeah.
In its theatrical way, and the humorous content of it, and the fact that it had a little story behind it.
In the dark it found his
immediately liking that song. I don't think that was one of the first batch of songs he played me, actually, although quite a few of those original songs ended up on the first album.
It is interesting that he was the first record on mute. You know, that great mixture of pop is a fabulous thing that can transform people's lives in a commercial way, and also the areas of the avant-garde and the experimental that can disturb and disconcert and unsettle people. It's all in there. So it was the perfect opening record, and one has to look at Daniel Miller and say that he knew exactly what he was doing. But then in a way, he did know what he was doing because it represented exactly what he believed in terms of music and image and sound and possibility and a kind of spirit of how it was produced.
Yeah, I think he had a tape recorder and a keyboard, and I think that was it. And a mic.
Yeah, and a tea trolley or something, wasn't it? I forget.
Was it? I don't remember that bit.
From the first moment he started to make his music and package it, you could see that he was interested in film and surrealism, art, in the way that all the great post-punk people were. They were feeding things into the music that came from outside music.
My name's Val, he was Tovey, so we were next to each other on the register, so we met first day of secondary school in the East End. At that time we were listening to John Peel and picking up lots of German bands like Amon Dahl, quite obscure bands. I know some of the first things that he did when he went to art school was mime and performance pieces. So we were always looking at very theatrical groups.
I enjoy playing live very much, and I think even if I wasn't involved in music, I'd be performing somewhere or another. I love performing to an audience.
Apart from the kind of costume side of things, didn't really give any indication of how wild his shows were going to be later on. He decided to put a band together with the two Belgian guys, Jean-Marc Lederman and Philippe Wakia.
And how do you think Frank's performance changed from then on in, when he had a band behind him, as opposed to having to do everything all at the same time?
Well, that was the point, really. He was liberated from having to play keyboards and operate things.
He was like what I wanted to do, what I wanted to be was like become this other thing that I could didn't have to be myself. And so really he kind of like represented a lot of that fantasy that I had about being a performer.
I think a lot of people who just listened, who'd only heard the records and maybe didn't go and see a live gig, would have been quite shocked to see a live performance because he was very different.
He would do a performance where there was a bar next to the stage, and he would like jump off the stage onto the bar, and he had this really long mic cord, and he would dance down the bar and be kicking everybody's drinks over, and people actually liked it. You know, I don't think the like of that has been seen in electronic pop since.
He did some reckless things and hurt himself quite badly on a few occasions, smashing his head open with an electronic drum, using his head as a drumstick, basically. I thought it was fantastic. I thought
Dada-esque, aren't they, really?
Yeah,
performances.
He'd do a lot of pretty dangerous things, like, you know, apart from just crowd surfing, he'd be climbing all over the rigging.
One of the more memorable performances, and this isn't something where Frank really necessarily damaged himself, because he damaged himself worse, slinging the microphone around and hitting it right here, which gave him some really great theatrical black eyes. But we were in Berlin and Frank pulled the ceiling down in the venue. Even though he was skinny, wasn't really supposed to support his weight.
At concerts, I think he went through things that because he was so full of adrenaline, you know, he wouldn't feel the pain till after the concert.
At the Paradiso in Holland, and he wasn't doing anything that extreme, but he went into the audience and he was at the back of the audience, and there was a small step that was only about a foot high, and he just jumped forward and didn't see that there was another step, and hit it with both heels on the edge of the step, and he just snapped the back of his tendons, fell on the floor, and he was sort of crawling around, and everybody just thought it was part of the gig, and enjoying him crawling around, didn't realise he was in agony. But he actually managed to crawl out of the audience, and there's a way down some stairs he could get underneath through various tunnels, and he managed to crawl all the way back onto the stage and managed to finish the rest of the set. But that was the end of the tour, because after the gig his legs blew up double the size.
His performances were always 100% and more. I mean, it was just pure energy, and none of us knew where it was coming from, and we were energized by that on stage as well. 5 weeks into a tour, when we couldn't hardly stand up in the morning, just getting on stage with Frank would make it go.
I don't really want to keep saying that they're two different people or creatures, because they're really not, but Fad had no qualms about bleeding or doing crazy things and, running around and all this stuff. But Frank really didn't even really want to get his ears pierced.
The fans who've never met him away from the stage will be amazed to see how quiet and lovely and normal this man was.
The combination, of seeing Frank on stage, being as having as much sort of charisma and imaginative performing power as an Iggy or a John Cale or any of his heroes in a way. There was no real difference ultimately between him and David Bowie on stage or Iggy Pop. I think he was that good. But off stage, obviously, he was the kind of guy you quite like as a friend.
He was like a really, lovely, sweet, warm, open guy. And then when he became the artist, doing things, he was very focused and much harder. Frank was full of ideas, far more than I was, especially in those years, because I didn't trust any of my ideas. I was really very intuitive kind of photographer. I would meet somebody and let the situation somehow dictate the photograph.
Frank wanted to work with me because he was had a reputation for doing Fad Gadget, and he wanted to do something far more abstract or more extreme or harsh. And I wanted to work with Frank because I had a reputation for doing noise, and I wanted to do something far poppier. So when the album came out, I think people assumed like all the noisy stuff was my contribution and all the poppy stuff was Frank's contribution. I think, at the end of the day, that really wasn't the case. We would go into the studio and just bang different stuff together, drag metal across the floor, filling up 16 tracks. Then we would randomly in the middle of this tape make a loop of this and listen back to all of them and pick out the ones that were the most cohesive, or in some cases the ones that were the least cohesive, and mix them together or put them through various effects, electronic devices, so forth. And, we came up with stuff that didn't sound like anything else. Even though it ended up taking a few years to come out, it still didn't sound like anything else anybody was doing at the time.
label you're working for, Mute, is very focused on synthesizer artists.
I'm not using the synthesizer for any fashionable reason.
No.
I'm using it from a functional point of view.
Yeah.
But I don't only use the synthesizer, I'll use anything. Yeah. I never know what's going to inspire me. I don't sit down and decide to write a song about a particular subject. Quite often, things that I've read in the paper or ideas that are going around in my head come out in the songs. So sometimes political things come through in that way. When I made Under the Flag, I wrote the lyrics within a 2-week period, and that was just as the Falklands conflict started. So that naturally that influenced my writing. Every image on TV was to do with that, you know.
I thought it was really brilliant. Give it a listen, and it sort of sums it up from the viewpoint of someone who didn't believe in that war perfectly.
And the ship was up as the sky falls down, tumbling heavy to the sea. Ooh, all of my leader is all I can play now. The people want war, 'cause war is for real. We can't hold together without common enemy. Hatred stimulates its infections. And the ship was up as the sky falls down, tumbling heavy to the sea.
When the excess of the 80s and the decadence of the times.
I think probably one of the neatest things from that trip was we had rented a big apartment. Downstairs there was an old-fashioned printing press that had the greatest rhythmic sound. We had Gareth Jones come out and tape it and do a loop, and that became the basis of Collapsing New People.
And there was that riff you played on Bottles as well, wasn't that? Tuned Bottles.
Yeah, we. And then we spent urinating into those to get the right pitch.
Faded, collapsing new people. Watch them collapsing. Jaded, collapsing new people. Watch them collapsing. Stay awake all night, but never see the stars, and sleep all day on the chain link bed of nails.
It's about, or inspired by, Ansturzen and Neubauten, just collapsing new buildings, because the building in Berlin fell down and they took their name from that. And he did a take on that about the people in Berlin sort of making themselves up to look as though they're sort of falling apart, I suppose.
I suppose the punk thing. I mean, people. Yeah. I mean, some people are quite meticulous to make themselves look like Keith Richards.
Hardcore fans liked the idea that he was this electronic, industrial, flamboyant, crazy, dangerous performer, and that's what the ultimate loyalty is to with Frank and Fad Gadget. It's that extreme performer. But as he was getting older himself and he was having children and they were asking certain questions and there were different things going on, his music did change to become something else.
franchise are completing. Can you hear me? Are you receiving? Hello, hello, this is Fad Gadget. Calling Mayday, calling Mayday.
He didn't like to keep treading the same ground. And I think he'd done so many different things with the band he had. He felt it was time to move on.
I mean, the first Frank Tovey records weren't really that folk.
No, they weren't that folky, no.
Diamonds and pearls, champagne and caviar, cigars and girls, a private plane, a shiny car, gold, silver and ivory, to have Blue Midas touch. Would it be enough for me? Can a man ever have too much? Luxury. The things I want, the things I need. One is a hunger, one is greed.
When you write lyrics for a song, you're almost plucking the words out of the air, you know. And when it works best is when I kind of have least control over it. When a song is hard work, that's usually when it's not very good. When it just comes naturally, they seem to be the best ones.
Oxford's and mink, sugar stocks and shares, only food and drink, up a marble flight of stairs, some tens and shades, a yacht anchored in Saint-Tropez, butler, cook, housemaids. Can the one ever turn away?
Luxury just kind of happened. I wrote that song. I haven't told anyone this. I was sitting on the floor in the kitchen, just with a scrap of paper and a pencil. And it suddenly came to me. I just sat down where I was in the kitchen.
One is greed, luxury.
So when he changed direction and decided to become Frank Tovey instead of Fad Gadget, I think a lot of those fans must have thought, well, what's going on, you know what I mean?
Frank was being a musician without the cover of Fad, let's say.
Fad Gadget was a name that he made up very quickly. It's a great name, but he didn't expect it necessarily to last that long. It was kind of what it was. It was going to be a fad.
No, I changed it because, partly because I wanted to have a fresh start and maybe take a new approach, and partly because in Britain I think I was, as Fad Gadget, I'd built up such a reputation as an underground artist or cult figure or something like that it was very difficult to break through that image. So I was effectively making music that was pop music, but I was still being categorised in the independent chart, you know, safely tucked away in one corner, and I wanted to break away from that.
He kind of almost did the reverse to Dylan, you know, he went to acoustic, whereas Dylan's great apparent betrayal was to go from acoustic to electronic. But Frank, in a wonderful gesture, went the other way.
So tell me, Frank, why'd you change your name from Fad Gadget to Frank Tovey?
Run out of funny answers to that question. Just get violent now.
Fundamentally, it was still him, it was still his imagination, still his personality. But he was just more interested in the idea of creating something that was organic. And of course, he'd done it all in a way. You know, making electronic music, you know, whether it was pop-based or slightly more kind of chaotic, he'd explored so many areas that there was nowhere else for him to go.
I didn't find it unnatural at all for him to start making albums, well, eventually like Tyranny in the Hired Hand and this sort of stuff. Because I always felt that essentially Frank was a folk singer, and the songs that he writes are folk songs. All right, even the ones he'd written as Fad Gadget. And what I mean by folk songs, I mean the strongest tradition. You know, he wrote about what he knew, he wrote about a class that he knew, and he wrote about ordinary people.
Is that song Bridge Street Shuffle? I thought that he was incredibly pressing in the way he often was, in a much more cybernetic sense earlier on, about the idea of the game show where people commit suicide, almost like he predicted the world of reality television.
I was found in a Whitechapel right just with the Elephant Man, and delivered by a midwife in the shell of a giant clam. My best friends were a sewer rat and a city fox. At the age of 10 I developed a yen for dismantling clubs. I biked him whistling from the east, wearing an open mind, wondering about my future and the treasures I would find. But some trendy cat from Chelsea looked at me in fright, said I needed elocution. I chewed my tongue all night. So meet me by the old bridge when the sun is getting low. There's a new gambling game they call the Lemming Show. I got 2 tickets from my seats for the riverside. We can take a picnic and watch the suicide.
Obviously, you know, a deeply sensitive man, he was very aware of the bullying undertow to British society through the 80s into the 90s, and the way that tended to dominate. And a lot of his songs with the Pyros, you know, were very deft and delicate ways of suggesting that this was very, very much not a good thing.
There's some strange people around here.
They asked me to join, and I had just come over from Ireland. I didn't know anything about Frank's music before that. I didn't even have a bass at the time, but I met up with Frank and Paul at Flat in Hermes Point, which became the subject of one of the songs as well. And we just sat down, played a few tunes together, a couple of the songs from the Terry and the Hired Hand, and got on really well. And I played with Frank then for the next couple of years. And that was the start of what became Frank Tovey and the Pyros.
Square, but I admit that once I travelled there, and I gave in to temptation too. When I left I had no shirt to wear. They try to sell you things you already own, tell you that this place is not your home, then charge you for the rain and sunshine too, poison everything that you've grown. But there goes the king of labourers, his load is heavy still. He'll carry his burden like a good man can to the foot of Liberty Hill, at the root of the Liberty Tree.
The Pyros were essentially a kind of cowpunk bluegrass band from Ireland. The Pyros became more electric and Frank became more folk, and somewhere in the middle we met and made the Grand Union and Worried Men album.
I found that a lot of people that were involved in the music I was making, the musicians that I'm working with, certain things like the record company, the place I cut records and stuff like that, a lot of those places and people lived on the canal that went around London. So I thought I'd use the idea of the Grand Union as a kind of metaphorical vehicle for writing about things within my life.
At the time I didn't really hear it, but when I started playing again with him in 2001, we did a little mini tour, and we ended up back at the Paradiso, and I met this guy called Bert who's been a fan for years, and he followed him right through. And he told me to listen to Grand Union, and he said listen to Cities of the Plain, which I think is a fantastic track.
Well, I'm a weary traveller, a puppeteer by trade. I count my profit in miles clocked up and the friends that I have made. My home I carry on my back, the map tattooed in veins, but I lost everything cities of the plain. Cities of the plain. Well, I came into town with my head held.
Grand Union was like the Grand Union Canal, which runs just at the back of this building. And it's like, I suppose the length of it, I don't know where it starts or ends, but it's like, it takes you certainly all through London and different sort of areas and different...
Where he grew up in the East End in Bow, there's a song called Bow Creek.
This is Bow Locks, which is the eastern extremity of the Grand Union and London canal systems. From here it's a canal onwards, that way it's the River Lee and Bow Creek.
Well, I was drifting downstream without a paddle and my boat had sprung a leak. I was bailing out with my bare hands down in Crooked Bow Creek. It was then I realised my situation wasn't unique. I saw a million people just like me with mouths that could only speak, looking for my puncher and packet band in Bow Creek.
So it's not an acoustic banjo?
Yeah, solid bodied. We made it. It sounds like a guitar sometimes though. Rock and roll.
It's a banjo?
Well, it looks like a banjo. It's round.
And what's that thing halfway up the neck?
It's a 5th string. Don't ask me why. It's just one of them instruments that has sort of like a drone. But when they play sort of bluegrass stuff on it, they're like.
He liked that idea. He liked the idea of doing a guitar solo on an electric banjo, even if it sounded the same. He liked the fact that because it was tuned differently, maybe the guy who was playing it would approach, would play different figures and different patterns and have different influences that could be brought into the music.
We were getting stuff from Frank that we would never have thought of, and building the electric banjo, especially for the Grand Union album, using electric slide banjo. I was using samplers with my foot pedals on stage and playing a 5-string bass, which I'd never done before. And we were experimenting a lot more with electronic sounds, whereas Frank was getting the roots and folk stuff from our background. Frank was a great songwriter. He had a lot of music in him, and he didn't play musical instruments technically very well, but he brought them to us as complete songs, played them to us on acoustic guitar, and then we went, ah.
Your art collection must have cost a mint, but you don't get it at all. You should have taken the notes straight from the bank and just pasted them on your wall. You point at the sky when you can't even see a finger, and that's alright by me. But you want me to want what you have got, and you won't get that from me. Right, your art collection, it must have cost a mint, but you don't get it at all. You should have taken all the notes straight from the bank and just pasted them up on the wall. Well, if you're so happy and you're so secure, why don't you let me be? But you want me to want what you have got, and you won't get that from me. There's no denying you're a winner, but in this race I cannot compete. It's the studs you have to wear to get up that twisted stair, and I don't like getting blood on my feet. But maybe one day I'll meet you on the road, and we can share a joke. You can tell me how you gave away everything you had, and now you're completely broke. Well, I'll tip my hat and wish you good luck, and leave you in the lap of luxury. But if you want me to want what you have got, then you won't get that from me.
The Grand Union Canal leads to Sion, which is Zion or Jerusalem. I don't know, maybe that's where I'm going.
You're going to do a Dylan.
Who knows?
He sort of retired, I suppose, for a while.
The last band I had, the Pyros, split up and life took over in a way. But most recently I did some music for the theatre. A friend of mine is a theatre director. I did some ambient music for that.
After Worried Men in Second-Hand Suits, which was the last album that Frank made, he spent a long period not making albums, but never over any of that period, as far as I'm aware, did he think that he wasn't a musician anymore. I started to direct a couple of plays, and I directed a production of Art in a small studio theatre in Warsaw. And I asked Frank to do the music for it. Great at manipulating sound. I did a play set in a pig pen. I gave him a load of pig noises, and he turned them around and he made them scream, and then he produced a completely incidental piece of music with all these pig screamings in the background.
I guess it was 1996, and I met him through Iris. It was his girlfriend at that time, and Iris was a friend of mine.
I didn't know really much about his music and his work, so that came later.
He also, didn't care. He just saw the air well, And then I showed him a demo. He was interested, and he was surprised and liked this stuff. And we thought, yeah, why not ask Frank to be our producer? And he liked the idea.
Liquor in the morning sun, kick away the pillow, turn the music on. Turn it on. Liquor in the morning sun, kick away the pillow, turn the music on. Turn it on.
Last November, Temple X did a show, and they invited me on stage to sing 3 songs with them, and it felt good again, So I decided to carry on playing.
Of course, he was, nervous and scared because, he didn't perform for years, but he came to our show, and we formed 3 songs of Fad Gadget, really rough and more rocky style. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Frank Tovey! Yeah! Frank Tovey!
Thank you.
Funny enough, he came back to London after the show, and there was a guy calling him and offering him a gig, a show in London. He asked us hey guys, do you want to be my backing band? I need a good band and I think you're great and I would like to work with you guys.
It went really, really well, and a couple of the guys from Depeche Mode are down there.
I think one of the nice things, and also one of the sad things, is that things sort of went full circle, because we got our big break supporting Frank back in 1918.
Behind me is a public house called the Bridge House. Well, it's been turned into a hotel now. I did a gig there once, supported by a band called Depeche Mode.
Daniel happened to be mixing Frank's sound. And to us, this was like, we had finally made it. We were going to be sharing the stage with Fad Gadget, and it was really exciting.
Frank called me and said, listen, do you want to be my band supporting Depeche Mode in Europe? And I was like, what? I mean, what are you talking about? And he said, yeah.
He was really into that, and his whole career seemed to be taking off again.
Let me out. Let me out. Let me out. I can't stand the dark anymore.
I see them every couple of years. I bump into them and we have some beers together, and I always have a laugh with them. The last time I was with them, we were completely drunk together, and I think we're going to have a good time, yeah.
It was not easy for him to do that tour. It was hard to get everywhere. They were travelling around in a little van, and I remember at one point towards the end of the tour, they had a really bad accident in that van.
They flipped it over and the car smashed into them while they were flipped over, and the drummer got thrown out of the back doors, broke his collarbone, cut his head open. He was okay, but he couldn't carry on with the tour. So Frank phoned me up and said, do you fancy doing the last 7 dates of this tour? And I'd been socialising with him, but I hadn't played with him for 15 years or so. And he said, you've got 1 day's rehearsal, and then it's 2 nights at Wembley Arena, a night at the Manchester MEN and the Birmingham NEC. So I sort of had to give it some thought, and then said, yeah, sure. And I was actually sort of spent the night trying to listen to the music and re-familiarise myself. I was rehearsing backstage at at Wembley. I was just crapping myself basically, because I was playing an octopad with a little bass drum pedal thing and a hi-hat pedal. So I was totally unused to this equipment. I was playing to a click track and a sequencer on headphones. And I had this little octopad thing. It was only about this big. I didn't have any cymbals, so it just felt like one of those nightmares where you go to school without your just in your underwear or something.
Stole of a nation, a room you never use. See yourself in power. Let's reach again.
It was a real crack, 'cause we flew with Depeche Mode on their privately chartered jet to Milan and Bologna. And it was great fun. It was brilliant. I remember being on the plane with Frank and just sort of looking at each other and saying, just with a look, and we could get used to this sort of thing.
Why didn't we do this before?
It seemed like things were going really well. I mean, the last time I saw him play and the last time I saw him was a gig at the Garage, which he did, which was absolutely packed out.
Open your eyes, there's a mushroom cloud up in the sky. Your hair is falling out and your teeth are gone. Your legs are still together, but it won't be long.
The Best Of album was necessary because I'm touring now, and it's stupid to be on tour with nothing in the shops. But also, there's so many young people coming to my concerts now. I thought that would be a good introduction to Fad Gadget.
Generally, it was much younger fans, and it was really positive feeling. He was very positive about building a new audience, really.
Yeah.
And the song sounded great on stage. Really they hadn't lost any of the impact, I think. That was nearly 20 years on.
Back to nature, glucose field and program to respond. It's gonna rain all night, but we'll be alright.
He was just getting back into writing music, and I could tell that things were starting to happen with him again.
It seemed just too perfect, maybe, I don't know. I heard so many stories, and he was never perfect. Maybe, I don't know. It sounded just too good, it was just too good, maybe.
I'll kiss you and you.
We just played in Gothenburg. I saw him off at the airport on a Sunday, and his girlfriend phoned me up on a Wednesday a few days later and told me he was dead, and I just couldn't take it in. It was just so shocking.
Unfortunately, I got the phone call from Nick Cash, and I just couldn't believe it, and I still couldn't believe it now, But just when I got it, I just froze, really. I didn't really know what to say.
It was Frank's daughter, Morgan, who rang me up to tell me that he died. And I should think, like everybody else, I just couldn't believe it. I had to establish that it was Frank that she meant, because Frank's dad is called Frank.
Yeah, it's like when somebody close to you, when that happens completely out of the blue. It's very hard to, and still is hard to actually, when we're sitting here talking about him, I don't feel like we're talking about somebody who's gone in a way.
After the last gig we had in Sweden, I think it was 4 days before he died, we had a wonderful night. We had a lot of fun till I think 9 o'clock in the morning, and after the show we went back to London, and we had a plan. So I thought we said, okay, everybody is working for a few months on his own stuff, and then let's meet together. The special thing was the last day we saw us, when we met us, when we said goodbye on Heathrow Airport, because I don't know why, but we met us 2 times, so we said bye, and after 5 minutes we met again, and we had the same good feeling, and that was very strange.
Yeah, and then 4 days later, unbelievable, just suddenly disappeared, died, and I was like,
The thing to say about Frank's death is that it was a tragedy, there's no doubt about it. It was a tragedy. He had plenty left to do, and he had the strength and the ideas and everything that was needed to do it.
There was talk about going to America and Japan and stuff like that, and he was quite excited about the prospects.
He wanted us to, get more involved in the future for new material, because the main thing was, after the whole touring, to do a new album, of course. That was his goal, his important thing.
create a great shape where it did end up, that after a period where nothing happened, there seemed to be this great moment when he toured with Depeche Mode. There was poetic justice to that. There was a great circular kind of clarity that where they had supported him and looked up so much to him, and then had gone on to be, international superstars. There was a return. There was a gesture in return, both from Depeche and Mute, I think, as well, to honour one of the great founding fathers. And that ultimately, unfortunately, in the light of his death, created a great completion, I think.
Definitely affected Depeche Mode in a big way, and I'm sure, hundreds of other bands.
I think that what Frank was doing definitely had an influence on me.
You can actually find a way to anything you want to work out in the world of pop. You can find a place where, in a way, Fad Gadget influenced. You can go to Daft Punk, you can go to Madonna, you can go to Marilyn Manson, you can go to the Auteurs, you can go to Death in Vegas, and a lot of the sounds he created, you can take them to house, to electronic music, the Electro Clash revival, to great electronic pop. It was all kind of there in Frank's music along the way. And even then he was a bit embarrassed about what I'd claimed on his behalf. And it was something about that humility and ultimate modesty. It was completely contradicted how he was on stage. That might be that strange ingredient that meant he never quite had that moment where it became official, that one hit, if you like.
I think, in hindsight, people can look back at that early material now and tell that it was influential and cutting edge, and that nothing done since kind of lives up to that watermark as far as electronic pop, being really poppy but having a really hard edge and people could dance to it,
And he was important. He influenced a lot of people. And he was very important to a lot of people. It's important to keep his name going and keep the music out there,
Yeah.
Oh, fuck off.
Everybody's waiting for their daily bread. I will never step out, I might lose my place. I've got my reservation in the